Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About It with Taylor Nolan. I'm your host, Taylor, and today is a very different episode than anything I've done before. Today we're actually having one of you listeners come on, and I got this email from her, and we're going to keep confidentiality here, but remain anonymous, but she wrote me this email and shared with me a little bit about some sexual abuse that she had growing up. She is a PhD student currently, almost finished, and just had a really moving story. And I was like, I haven't done an episode on PTSD. I haven't done one kind of focused on EMDR, which is a form of treatment for trauma. And she also has a cat, and I was just kind of like, I feel moved by this listener, by this email. And so we've touched base, and we're here on FaceTime now. So welcome to the show, and I'm so excited to have you come on and talk with me about this stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit different, and I'm not sure where the pod will take me or all of us in what direction. But, I think one of the biggest things that I love about the pod is being able to influence people and helping people feel connected through our real, authentic stories. And the fact that you're open and willing to be so incredibly brave and authentic with sharing this stuff is just... I want to say inspiring, but I don't like that word. But it's very moving, and I honestly, it feels very much like a privilege that you're open to sharing this very vulnerable part of your life with all of us today. So thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah. So my goodness, where do we start? I mean, I got some pieces of your story when we spoke briefly on the phone, but I mean, essentially, you're getting your PhD in school counseling, right?
School psychology.
School psychology.
So diagnosing learning disabilities and making sure that everyone in special ed is getting the support that they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, when exactly, I guess we'll just kind of go through a timeline.
Cool.
Was kind of my thought. To get, to kind of where you got to where you're at now. And I think one point that I think is really important for us to kind of dive into that you had brought up is the sexual abuse within your family, because that is definitely something that does not get talked about.
No, not at all. Not at all. I feel like it's difficult to talk about sexual abuse or rape when it's someone outside of the family. Mm-hmm. Very difficult. But then when it's inside the family, it's definitely, there's an extra layer of shame there and an extra layer of people trying to keep you quiet. To not share what's happened. Mm-hmm. So I was 9 the first time that my older brother raped me. He's 3 years older than me. And so I was just told, this is what all older brothers do. And this is just completely normal. This is not weird, but you can't tell anyone. You can't tell your friends. You can't tell our parents, because I will kill you if you tell someone. And as a 9-year-old, you believe that. You kind of look up to your older brother and think that they kind of know how to live in the world, and you just accept that they have your best interest at heart. And so that just kind of continued. It would be regular, several times a week, for about 5 years. And so when I was 14, I was starting 9th grade, and starting high school was a really big deal. And I told myself at the beginning of that summer, I was I will not start high school and have this still happening to me, because everything always still felt wrong about it. I just didn't have the words or the way to express it. I just didn't understand who I could tell.
You were something's not right here.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, everything was not hunky dory, because I watched my friends who had older brothers, not ever interact with their older brothers that way. And so I was like, well, something's off, but obviously I couldn't tell anyone because I was terrified. And so I just kind of kept quiet. But I was actually watching, it's super weird. I was watching Dr. Phil one day. No, as a 14-year-old, it was a thing that I did.
Yeah.
super random. And he had a little boy on the show whose grandfather had been abusing him. And he was probably 7 or 8. And he was on the show talking about it and how important it was that he like told his parents and all of the help that he got because of that. And I was like, okay, that's it. Like, I have to do it. I have to tell my parents. And so I wrote a note to my mom and I put it under her pillow. And then I went to bed.
That's really sweet.
Yeah, like I couldn't physically get the words out of my mouth without like losing it. And so I wrote it all down and put it under her pillow. And then, so she found it later that night and came in and woke me up and basically was like, is this true? Like, are you making this up? Where did you see this? And I was like, no, like this happened to me. Like, I don't know if you understand, but like, I'm scared to live in this house. Like, I don't want to be here. And so she said that she would talk to him. And so she went into his room and talked to him and basically came back and told me, like, you were making it all up. And if it did happen, it's your fault. It's because you dressed a certain way or like you walked from the bathroom to your room in a towel. And so, of course, that kind of like gives him license to do that if it did happen. And so I thought I was going to be met with support and love and help. And I was met with, you're crazy, which just kind of reinforced the notion that I'm the crazy one and that I'm the one that has no touch on reality. And so that's just kind of how I went through high school. Was like,
I mean, that's
clearly no one understands this.
Yeah, that's like very, very invalidating. And I'm curious if you can think back to then and identify like how that felt for you. It
was really hard. And I think a lot of it I like pushed down. Like I remember kind of going through high school, not really feeling much of anything. And I think that was just kind of my like subconscious coping mechanism. Like there was no one that I could talk to about it that felt safe and comfortable. And so I just kind of like shoved everything down. And
now when we spoke before, you had mentioned too that you had a younger brother.
Yes.
And similar things were happening with him as well.
Yeah. So he's 3 years younger than me. And so he was also being abused by my older brother. And then, I mean, there were times when like we would all be in the same room. And so like we kind of banded together a little bit. Like after I told my mom and it stopped, my younger brother and I kind of banded together. Like, okay, how are we going to get over this?
Yes, like you two could talk to each other about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he developed OCD. He had an obsessive thought that basically like God was out to get him. And so his compulsion was obsessively reading the Bible and taking notes. And so he would have like notebooks and notebooks full of just stuff that he had written. And that was a very noticeable thing for my family. Like it was very obvious that he was always in his room doing this. I mean, he would stay up all night and do this because he just had this idea that like he was dirty and God was out to get him. And so my parents definitely responded to that differently because he reacted to things in a very outward way, whereas I just kind of shoved everything in and pushed it down as far as I could. So he did end up, I mean, he had a psychiatrist and a psychologist going through like middle school and high school, where I did not. No.
And you didn't reach out to like there were school counselors and whatnot there. And
yeah. So I grew up in a really, really small town, and so it literally was everyone knew everyone. And like my high school counselor was my best friend's mom, and so it was just. I mean, it would have really kind of shaken everything up had I said something. Just because it was like everyone would have known.
So I mean, you were really silenced and invalidated, and I imagine didn't feel very safe.
No. I mean, I like I remember every night when I would go to bed, I would shut my door, lock it, and put a chair under it every night. Just because I was trying to do anything I could to be able to sleep. And so my brother went off to college about 6 hours away, starting my sophomore year of high school. So about a year after I told my parents, he did leave for college. And so things got a little bit easier to be at home, but it still was like, there's this giant elephant in the room that literally no one will acknowledge. And I'm the only one that like really realizes that it's there. My parents are really, really good at not seeing things, and just they have blinders on, just like all of us do, but they especially have blinders on when it comes to me, and just not really thinking that anything could have possibly happened, and how could you be affected by something that didn't happen?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Ugh. Yeah, as someone who very much has to speak her mind on everything, that I can't imagine being put in a situation like that. And I mean, talking about it now, like you seem very much like, you know, like you've kind of processed it, but you almost kind of talk about it like very like matter of factly. Like,
yes. Yeah.
This is it.
I tend not to like feel emotions very easily. And so I tend to like, especially with this kind of stuff, I've just sort of rehearsed the script of it so much that it's like, oh yeah, like, of course, this is just what happened. And this is the timeline. And like this happened and then this, but there is still like a lot of emotion and sadness and anger there. Mostly because the issue still hasn't resolved. Like it's an ongoing thing that my parents don't believe that anything happened. And so it's not like, all of a sudden now they're really supportive. But it was hard because I think as a teenager, like that's a really formative time for your like identity and kind of your personality and who you are. And to have that kind of totally invalidated was definitely difficult.
Yeah, and as a teenager, that's when you're like exploring things sexually, typically. Yeah. So, I mean, how then did you go forward, you know, in relationships or developing relationships with other boys? Like, how did that kind of impact you?
Yeah, so let's see. In high school, I definitely, for a while, like slept around, just because it was like, okay, well, this is how I know that I can get attention and how like I can feel validated is through this. And so I
think that's common even for people who haven't experienced the sexual abuse.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I want validation and this is a way that I can get it and it feels safe. I think I knew how to do that and like be in that role. I mean, I literally like would put a pillow over my face or like be crying the whole time, but it was just something that I like knew I could do and then someone would pay attention to me. And then I went, let's see, my senior year of high school, I dated someone, and I, you know, thought I was going to marry him because everyone thinks they're going to marry their high school boyfriend. Yeah. But he, like, I told him everything that happened and he kind of was just like, okay. And like moved on with his day, which, you know, typical 17-year-old boy reaction to something like that. But again, that was just like another layer of invalidation. It was like, okay, like, sure, that may have happened to you, but it can't affect you.
Was there anyone in your life that like, even maybe at, you know, up until now, who you've been able to find that like will hug you when you share this stuff or like be there with you for you to like feel what it actually feels like to have experienced all of this and like to just let you be vulnerable and have a safe place to talk about it?
Yeah, so I definitely, it actually wasn't until I came to grad school. So about 4 years ago, was the first time that I really felt like I had met a friend that was like able to let me be me. She's absolutely fantastic. She'll be really angry that I mentioned her, but she, like, I mean, we are literally inseparable. We do everything together, and I can call her and just be sobbing my eyes out and not say anything for 30 minutes, and that's just like completely okay. And so I'm really grateful to have her, just because it has been pretty isolating. In college, I dated a guy. I went to school really far away from where I grew up, but I actually met this guy from back home. And so we were dating long distance, and we would hang out over breaks. And he was incredibly abusive, textbook, like, you shouldn't wear blue today because I don't like that color. You can't hang out with those people. And so I really didn't have friends going through college just because I was very isolated because I was dating him, and I thought that was like the greatest thing in the world. Like, I was like, well, I have a boyfriend, so like everything's all right. It doesn't matter if I have friends. I have a boyfriend.
And as women, we're always told too that our value is based on like us having a relationship, and you're even told that, I mean, in a way by your parents, of saying, well, you shouldn't have dressed that way, or you can't walk from your bathroom to your bedroom in your towel.
Like I was literally 9. Like, I don't understand. Like, I mean, 1, that logic never holds true. Yeah. But 2, like, I was 9.
Yeah, like how a 9-year-old comprehends that. Like,
right.
That must, I mean, that's putting all of the blame on you. Like, that's.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. And so there was just a lot of kind of shame that was internalized, and I pretended it wasn't there and it didn't exist. But it always did. And it would always pop out at inopportune times. So it's always there. I just, for a long time, pretended it wasn't, because I didn't feel like I would be validated if I said, like, no, this is what I actually think about on a daily basis. Like, this is what I'm really going through. I didn't feel like that would be met with any support.
And then how, I mean, I get emails and questions about this all the time, of like, how do you know, like, to talk to someone, like, especially when you are already met with some kind of rejection or invalidation, like, how do you then actually find someone who will be supportive and who will listen?
Yeah. So let's see, when I started grad school, I had seen a couple therapists. I saw one at my undergrad university. And it was just not a good fit whatsoever. And so I went probably 3 or 4 times, and I was like, this isn't going to work.
Can you touch on why that wasn't a good fit? Like, what made you know that?
Yeah. So I went to a Christian undergrad. And so the counseling center there was very focused on Christian-based counseling, which, I mean, is wonderful. But I think that they were looking at my experience through the lens of religion, and not through the lens of, like, I can't get out of bed in the morning, and, like, I need help. Like, I need to be down here getting help before I can even think about anything else. And so I think that it was just it wasn't what I needed. It's nothing against her or anything. It just wasn't what I needed at the time.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So when I started grad school, I thought I had it all together. I was like, I graduated, I have a bachelor's in psychology, and I'm like all that. So I started grad school, and I started making friends, and that was weird for me. And I was like, I definitely have it all together. Like, this is it. I'm over everything. It's totally fine. And then it was probably about 2 weeks after I moved here. I got super, super drunk at a party, and I started telling everyone, like, hey, my brother raped me when I was little. Hey. And I was like going around to everyone and saying that. And it made me like really realize, like, okay.
That like literally just gave me goosebumps.
Yeah. Like, I was like, I think I have it all together, but I really don't. And so at that point, I kind of was like, okay, like, maybe I can give this one more shot at finding someone to work with this on. And so I ended up going to the university counseling center. And I at first got matched up with someone that really wasn't a great fit for me. It was a guy, and that for me felt very weird, but I didn't know how to express that. And so I stopped going. And then about 6 months later, I was like, this isn't going away. So I went back and I got matched up with, the girl who was my counselor for about 3 years. And she is a literal godsend, like the most wonderful person I've ever met in my entire life. She is amazing. But it definitely wasn't without trial and error. I think a lot of times people expect, like, oh, if I decide I'm going to go to therapy, it's a big risk. And so you want it to pay off, and it doesn't always pay off right away. And that can be really scary for people and make them kind of want to shy away from trying again. But I promise, like, if you stick with it, you will find the right person that's the best fit for you.
Yeah. And one thing I want kind of both of us to address, because I know I get a lot of questions about this as well. being someone in the field of psychology, being someone who is, in a helping field and seeking your own counseling, how did you wrap your head around that? How did that feel, being like, I just got my bachelor's in psychology and I need to go see a therapist? Like, how did you process that?
Yeah, it was definitely, I just kind of went through thinking like, well, I don't need therapy. Like, I know what they're going to tell me. Like, I know everything that's going to happen. So there's really no need for me to even go. And then I just kind of started realizing that, like, just because I chose this as a profession doesn't mean that I'm automatically like immune to mental health concerns. Like, it doesn't, there's not like a get out of jail free card when you sign up to be in the helping field that like, oh, I don't have to deal with these issues. Like, we all do. And so I think that it was just kind of almost like getting over my own ego about it.
Yeah.
And just saying like, you know what, like, I need to get help for myself so that I can help other people, because you can't pour from a cup that's empty. And my cup was like bone dry for years. And so it was just, I just had to kind of get over myself, but also like I had support from a couple of my friends in grad school that were like, it's okay. Like, you don't have to have it all together all the time just because you signed up for this program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. And I would say, for me, something similar of just, I think really the biggest point that you said was like, it's kind of an ego thing too, of like, no, like, I'm going to be the helper. I don't need it. And, through not only my experience on the show, but even just being like a young woman in counseling, there's so many times where it's like, if you do have one mistake with some kind of, interpersonal relationship, that it's like, oh, well, how could you possibly be a counselor? Oh my gosh. And it's kind of like, you have to humanize yourself for a second and be like, hold on, like,
yeah. Well, and that's like saying to a nurse, like, well, you're a nurse. How could you possibly get like a cut on your knee or something? And it's like, but it happens to everyone. Like, you're not immune to it just because you're in a certain field. But I definitely think there's I think there's pressure put uniquely on the helping fields with regard to mental health.
Absolutely.
When it comes to seeking help, and it is definitely not ideal.
Yeah. And I'm really glad and happy to hear that there were people in your program that were supportive of it, and that you didn't let this trauma and these experiences make you think that you were someone that couldn't be in this field.
Right. Right. And it was hard in undergrad, I think, because I would we'd be reading through a textbook or reading like a memoir or something, and I would be like, that's my life. And I obviously didn't tell anyone about that, but it definitely was hard. And I think the guy that I was dating at the time had a really negative view on that. And he was like, well, how can you help other people when you're like this worthless person? I'm like, and so it was hard to fight through that and say, like, just because I don't have it all together doesn't mean I can't still help.
Yeah, exactly. And also that in a way, through getting the education, you are in a way helping yourself to also then be able to help other people too. I mean, I think it could definitely be a whole other conversation on being someone in the helping field seeking help. But I think bottom line, you're human as well. And especially when you've had some kind of trauma and you're continuously getting triggered by something, it sounds like this kind of continually was coming up for you, and you're like, I should address this. I know this is something I need to deal with, but maybe I'm not ready just yet. And then you started with this wonderful woman in your program.
Yeah.
And how did that...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and like, how did that go for you? Like, what kinds of things came up? What kind of things were you able to like take away from it? Like... Yeah. So I was, I saw her for about 3 years, like at least once a week. It was sometimes twice. I mean, we just had a really, really strong relationship. And I think for about the first year, I was really good at, like talking
out of one side of my mouth, but meaning something completely different. Like I would say like, oh no, I'm fine. Like this is just a thing that happened to me, but like, I'm fine. This doesn't bother me. And she pretty quickly got really good at calling me out on that and was like, no, you're not. Like you are not okay. I can see it on your face. Like you're not okay. Yeah. Tell me what's really going on. And I hated her for that for a while because I was like, well, no, like, let me just tell you it's fine and we can move on.
You're like, stop telling me I'm not okay. I'm trying so hard to be okay. Like, and I've convinced myself I'm okay.
Yeah. Like, don't break down this facade that I have built for myself. It's working. Yep. But in the end, I mean, I have been so grateful for her ability to literally just see through any wall I put up and tell me like, you're lying.
And it sounds like you guys had good rapport for her to be able to do that.
Oh, too. For sure. I mean, at the, like pretty far into our relationship, it was literally like there was just a look. And like I knew when she gave me the look, it was like, shoot, I'm like making this up. Like I am not really feeling this. I'm just saying it. But so I spent a long time with her just kind of like going through the motions, saying what I thought I should say, because I kind of knew how this was going to go. And I was going to walk in and she was going to say like, what has been going on? And I would just say like, oh, everything's great. And then I would be able to leave. And that is not what happened. Yeah. Not even close. Yeah. So, about a year in, she is a grad student as well. And so she had like a university supervisor. And so that supervisor really wanted to try prolonged exposure with me, which is basically like I would sit in a room with the two of them and they would have me pick a memory that I could remember and then close my eyes and recount like every detail of that. Like, what are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? Like, what are you hearing? And just kind of work through that story. But it involved me like using words and talking about things that I didn't want to talk about. Like I had to say like, oh, I'm seeing like my brother with no clothes on. And that's really an awkward thing. And so I think I just had my own walls up. And I think that therapy is definitely beneficial for a lot of people. It just wasn't for me. And so then after that, EMDR came up as a potential other option.
And yeah, do you want to get into a little bit about like what that is and what your experience was with that? Because I know that's a treatment that like I think has been put out there and like some people know what it is and other people don't. Even people that like kind of know what it is, they're like, that sounds foo-foo-y. What are you talking about?
No, I remember the first time that she told me about it, I was like, no, like there's no way. Like I mean, I'll go read the research, but no, like I'm not doing that. So essentially, I would sit and she would have me pull up like a scene in my head, like a memory of something that had happened. And then I would tell her like what the most distressing part of that memory is. And then I would rate my distress on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being this doesn't bother me at all and 10 being I don't want to think about this anymore. I need to get out. And then she would have me identify like a negative cognition that made me believe about myself. So a lot of the ones that I was prone to going back to were like, I'm worthless, like nobody will love you, like you're crazy, like no one will believe you. Those are kind of the like trademark ones for me. And then she used her fingers. I know there are some people that use like bells or music.
Tapping,
so she would,
some people use the finger tapping.
Oh yeah. So she would basically just put 2 fingers like out in front of her and she would have me follow her fingers with my eyes. And then when she was done, I would take a deep breath and then I had a couple minutes to just say literally whatever came to mind. And I remember thinking, like, there's literally no way that you are going to wave your fingers in front of my eyes. It sounded like hypnotism, to be honest. It was like, this is ridiculous. And the first time that we did it, I remember it was probably like 15 minutes in. I was sobbing, and like all of these things were coming up that I like hadn't remembered or hadn't thought about. And so essentially the like bottom line of the therapy is, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
But
thank you for saying it so I didn't have to say it.
Oh yeah, no problem. So it's essentially like with the eye movements, it's allowing your brain to reprocess that memory and almost like take it out of the like trauma box and put it into another box. So basically like allowing your brain to file that away somewhere different where it's not causing you distress constantly.
That was a wonderful description of it. Thank you for that. I know, because there's so many different ways you can explain it where like there's a lot of jargon involved and it's like complicated.
Even the name. It's like, what does this even mean?
Yes, but no, the way that you just explained that, perfect. And this is also why I was like, yeah, you'll be a great person to have come on as a listener, because not only do you have this like personal experience, but you also have some of the like educational background, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, so thank you for covering that. But it is, I mean, I will say EMDR, like there's been so much research on it, like big organizations like APA, Department of Defense, recognize it as like a very effective form of treatment for helping treat trauma. And it's somewhat of a newer thing, but there's been so much research on it. Like it's
definitely.
It's very effective treatment for trauma.
Yeah. And again, I thought it was really random, but I think it was just like I trusted my therapist enough to be like, okay, you wouldn't be putting this in front of me if you didn't think there was a chance that it could help me. So let's just take a gamble and see what happens. And it ended up kind of being it was the right fit for me. It didn't involve as much talking as like prolonged exposure, and I don't know, it clicked with me. And so we did that for over a year probably, which was definitely difficult. I tend to gloss over like how difficult it really is. But it was definitely a hard thing, but 100% worth it.
Yeah, because I mean, all of these memories and experiences that you've kind of had to push down in order to go through life, to be able to actually process life that's happening in front of you, are now being brought back up, and you're having to like really process through it and, work through the distress of it all. Which obviously is a very, very vulnerable and just quite an experience, I can only imagine. And prior to starting this EMDR treatment, had you been diagnosed with anything specifically?
So the woman that I saw in undergrad, I mean, I saw her for probably 2 months, 3 months maybe. So I had been diagnosed with PTSD. And I just kind of thought like, oh, okay, like they just kind of had to put that label on me, but it's not really a thing. And then I started reading more about it, and I was like, oh no, this is kind of like, I was literally reading my life as I was reading through like the symptoms and all of that kind of stuff. And so that was hard to be like, it's like they were writing this about me.
Yeah. But I imagine that too also kind of made something click.
Yeah. I think it was a moment where I realized that I wasn't completely alone. I think that I tended to isolate myself, obviously, because I had never been met with support or care when I had shared things that had happened to me. And so I tended to be like, well, I'm clearly the only person in the entire world that has ever felt this way or has ever gone through something similar. And to be able to read like in the DSM, because I'm a nerd, but to be able to read and be like, no, like there's a group of people that got together and recognized that this is something that enough people struggle with, that it warrants like being a disorder. And so I think it definitely was enlightening and helped me feel like I wasn't alone, even if I didn't have like a community at the time.
Can you... Are you open to sharing what some of those symptoms of PTSD that you remember experiencing? Yeah.
So I had really, really bad flashbacks. So there would be, even going through grad school, there would be moments where usually about 2 or 3 minutes at a time, I would just kind of have this blank stare on my face. And it used to happen quite a lot when I was at home alone, but it also would happen out in public, which is definitely awkward when you're like at dinner with people and then all of a sudden like you're not really there. So definitely the flashbacks. Nightmares, I have a couple different ones, but there's one that I've literally had since I was 9.
And these are all focused around the sexual abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've had pretty much the same nightmare since I was 9. It's less frequent now, obviously, but it's the same one. And I have not yet been able to kind of completely eradicate that, but it doesn't happen very often. Let's see. I definitely avoided anything. I mean, I just tried not to be home very much. So I avoided the reminders. My room at my parents' house is still set up exactly the same way as it was when I was 9. It's the same things hanging on the wall. It's the same bedding. It's the same mattress. I mean, so it's hard to go home, now even, but, I also have like random triggers. Like I cannot, like if people tap me on the shoulder, I like jerk, or like I have been known to kind of like throw an elbow back.
Is that because that's something that your brother would do?
Yes. Yeah. So like if I were, let's say like on the computer or something and he like wanted me to do something with him, he would come up and he would tap me on the shoulder. And so that's just something that that's just the way that my brain has processed that, is that that's a dangerous thing. And so it just kind of enacts that like fight, flight, or freeze thing for me still. And, I mean, I think that I was just really like hyper vigilant, and my mood was just really flat. Like nothing could really get me excited. And I was just kind of like all the time just going through the motions and pretty numb.
Yeah, well, that's what you were just making me think of that, numb. And we've talked, prior to this about our love of Brene Brown. And one of the things she very beautifully says is, we can't selectively numb. When you numb joy, when you numb the bad, you also numb joy, and you numb love. And you just, when you numb all the things. Yes.
Oh yeah. And that definitely was me for, a large period of like adolescence and young adulthood. Was just like, it's easier to not feel anything than it is to even try to feel joy, because I know that it's going to come with such sorrow and kind of grief almost. So, but I think another important thing with PTSD, I think people it's very portrayed as this is something that war veterans can deal with, but it's not really something that is talked about as far as anyone else. And I think too, a lot of people misunderstand that like you don't even have to personally go through the trauma in order to develop PTSD. Like if someone close to you is in a really bad car accident, you can develop PTSD just from hearing about that and kind of watching them go through it. And so I think a lot of people disenfranchise the reactions because it's like, well, I didn't really go through it, so I can't possibly be having this negative reaction to it, but you can. It's completely normal.
Yeah, and I think we saw that a lot, like with 9/11, that a lot of people a lot of people started experiencing PTSD symptoms, and they weren't in New York, or they weren't, Thank you for making that point.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people, it's like something that's not really talked about that often. Because it's like, oh, well, like if you're a veteran, then like you can have PTSD, but if you're not, then like you're just being dramatic, or you're just overreacting, or like that can't possibly bother you that much.
Yeah.
And no, it can.
It definitely can.
It does.
And so with going through the EMDR treatment, how has that impacted your symptoms with PTSD?
Yeah. So I don't really flashback at all anymore. I can't remember the last time that I have kind of like blank stare, gone somewhere else for any length of time. My nightmares are like maybe once a month, which I feel like is a very normal, everyone has nightmares every once in a while. And I think I'm just better able to like go through my day and not have it be constantly on my mind. I think that I'm definitely one, like, I'm a cyclical thinker, and I definitely worry a lot about how other people perceive me. And so if I said anything that may have alluded to, like, oh, this is something that I struggle with, I would try and, like, backtrack in my mind and be like, oh, well, they must think that you're crazy, and then you're going to have to go and do this because you need to make sure they don't really know that. And I think a lot of that has gone away. I feel like I interact with people, like, more authentically, instead of it being this, like, I have walls up.
Well, like, yeah, I mean, I'd say so. Look where we're at now.
I know. And I literally, like, I thought about this, I don't know, probably about a year ago. I was like, you know, maybe I should, like, dabble in the advocacy and, like, the publicly sharing my story. And I was like, there is no way. Like, you are not that kind of person. And now I'm like, well, okay, guess we're doing this.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you're doing it. And I guess as we kind of talk through, you know, this little timeline of your life and the things that you've experienced, so much of, like, the work that you've been doing has been around, like, this 9-year-old inner child version of yourself. And you know, throughout your time in counseling or just your own personal work, have you done any kind of work, like, on that inner child and, like, talking to her and, like, getting in touch with her as to what she felt? I mean, as being a 9-year-old girl and being invalidated and being told that you're not safe with your family, like, that's a lot. Like, I want to go back to that 9-year-old little girl and be like, nope. Come here. It's going to be okay, you know, and wanting, like, to talk to her. And I'm curious if you've done any of that kind of work of talking to her.
Yeah, so I'm a big, like, journaler, but I it's like feast or famine with me. Like, I'm either writing furiously for, like, days at a time, or I, like, pretend I don't know how to write anything for months.
That's exactly me right now.
It's really bad. And so I have really found that, like, writing letters to people helps me, and I never mail them. But, like, if I'm feeling anger towards someone, like, I've written letters to my mom, and I've written a letter to my brother, and I've written a letter to my abusive ex-boyfriend. And, just kind of being able to get those thoughts down on paper has been really helpful for me. And so I did at one point, like, write this long letter to, like, child me. And it was super awkward because I was like, I wouldn't talk to a 9-year-old like this. But it just, I think
but
that
also not every 9-year-old has experienced the things you've experienced.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that I just had to grow up really fast, just from a maturity standpoint. I all of a sudden had to be this, like, pillar of grace and poise at a really young age when most kids are just kind of going through life playing with toys. And so, so I did write a letter to 9-year-old me, and it was really awkward, and I, like, didn't want to do it. I was like, this sounds really hokey, but I'm super glad that I did, just because I feel like I was able to say that, like, it's okay. Like, you don't, I'm going to probably cry right now. Okay. Like, you don't understand now, but you will later. And just that, like, it's scary to have no one believe you, but just, like, know that I do, and I always did. And I don't know. I mean, it definitely was a hard thing to write because it just brought up a lot, and it's bringing up right now just a lot of, like, the things that I missed out on. Like, having a normal childhood and, like, having your first boyfriend and, like, I don't know, having your first kiss not be with your brother. Like, that's pretty normal stuff that I missed out on. And so I have almost kind of had to go through, like, a mourning and grieving process for my childhood, which has been weird to say the least. Yeah.
I mean, you're grieving all these experiences that you would have liked to have had.
Yes.
And that you saw other people around you have. And this, like, I imagine some, like, confusion as a 9-year-old is like, well, wait, why?
Like, wait a second. Yeah. And I think that a lot, for years, my biggest question was just, like, well, why me? Like, why wasn't this, like, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, but, like, why did this have to happen to me? And I don't think that there is ever I mean, no person can give an answer to that feels like satisfactory. Like, I can't be like, oh, well, I went through this because of X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of one of those things that it happened, and I'm trying to make the most of the fact that it happened and not let it like get in my way and prevent other people from benefiting from the fact that I went through something like that.
Do you at all blame yourself?
I definitely, I mean, obviously when my mom was like, it's your fault, like you dressed a certain way, that definitely like internalized a lot of self-blame. And I think I can still get to a place where I blame myself. But I think through like working with my counselor and going through EMDR, I think I definitely have kind of taken my self out of that equation, and realized that it was just a really crappy environment that I was in, and it had nothing to do with who I was as a person or anything that I did. It's just something that happened to me. But the fact that it happened to me and not because of me allows me to like move forward without it. Like it's not who I am. And so that distinction has been helpful in helping me kind of like always carry the lessons that I've learned from it with me, but not have to walk around with the shame and the guilt because it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've been able to make those distinctions, because if not, I would be wanting to say them to you. And so now, I mean, the field that you're going into is school psychology, and you're going to be working with 9-year-old children. You know, have you processed like what that means for you?
Yeah, I remember, so we have a clinic on campus where we do testing for children and adults. And I remember the first time that I worked with a 9-year-old, I was like looking them in the eye and like, you know, you're observing them as you're testing them, not in like a creepy way, just like seeing what they're doing. And I remember as soon as they left, I cried for probably about an hour, because it was just like, I forget how young and naive and vulnerable you are at 9. And so to see that sitting right in front of me was really hard. But I think that having that experience has allowed me to kind of like disassociate from that in a healthy way. Not like I'm never going to feel anything again, but like that because there are 9-year-olds that are very carefree and vulnerable, and there are 9-year-olds that are going through similar things to what I went through, and sometimes like worse things than I went through. And so I think that it's allowed me to kind of have the empathy to meet people where they are, especially kids, because a lot of times, I mean, a kid isn't necessarily going to walk up to you and say like, this is something that's happening to me at home. But to be able to see kind of the markers of that and watch the behavior and be able to notice like, oh, there's probably something going on. How can I step in and help?
And also probably because you can relate in some ways to seeing those signs. Yeah,
and be like, oh, like when I was in 3rd grade, I was also doing that. And to be able to empathize on that level has been beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine in some ways it's, you know, while you're already doing this healing work on your own inner child, but then you're also able to like pay it forward and help with the healing with other children before they have to do the work on their own inner child later on as an adult.
Yeah. And I definitely like, I remember, like writing all of my essays to get into grad school and like trying to figure out how like vulnerable to be. And I remember in every single one of them, I wrote some variation of like, if I can help one child not go through something like I went through, then like my career will be worth it. And so that definitely has just kind of been a motivation for me all the way through, is being able to prevent kids from having to go through some of the things that I've gone through, because it hasn't been fun or easy, but it's been worth it. So.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I'm just going to take a shot in the dark here and say that you probably have already helped several children before your career even fully starting at this point.
Hopefully.
I'm sure that you have already done that and are making huge differences in children's lives. And before we have to kind of wrap up a little bit, I do want to touch on kind of like where you're at today in terms of your relationships with your family and with your brothers. Yeah. If you're comfortable sharing some of that.
Yeah. That's totally fine. So I still live about like 14 hours away from my parents. My older brother got married a couple of years ago, and I was actually a bridesmaid in the wedding. And my sister-in-law does not know anything that happened between my brother and I. So that's definitely a hard relationship, just because I feel like as much as I'm walking on eggshells around my family in general, then here's this new person that doesn't even know what kind of situation she's walking into. And there's a level of almost like I feel bad for her because I'm like, this is who you married, but you don't even know it. So that has been definitely difficult. Being in the wedding was really hard because, you know, you stand up there and you want to smile and be happy and clap and cheer. And I didn't really feel a whole lot of that at the wedding. And so that was hard. So my younger brother lives about 6 hours from me. And so I see him pretty regularly. We're really close. But I really only go home like for Christmas and maybe for a couple days over the summer. So I don't really see my parents too much, but we definitely have a very surface level relationship. Like if I'm crying because something went wrong at school or something's going on, my mom is not a person that I call because I'm typically met with judgment and kind of shaming. So we definitely don't have an ideal mother-daughter relationship. It's very surface level.
Is that something else you have to kind of mourn?
It's hard. Yeah, it's really hard, especially watching like my friends be really close with their moms and like, I don't know, like going on vacations with their family and being so happy and like taking pictures with their mom and like putting them on social media. And especially like Mother's Day is always really hard because everyone's like, my mother's great and you don't know my mom, but she's the best. And I'm like, I don't have that. And I know that there are a lot of other people that are in my boat. But it's hard when you feel like you're I'm the only one in my immediate circle that's in that situation. So yeah, it's definitely hard. And I've had to kind of mourn the fact that we're likely never going to have that type of relationship. But
I mean, how does that feel?
It sucks. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's like, I'm typically one, and I'm sure you've noticed I do this quite often. I like put bows on things. So I like will say something really hard and then I'll be like, but it's been worth it. Or like, but it's been helpful. And I just kind of like tie it with a bow because I don't like making other people uncomfortable. And I know that there are parts of my story that can make people feel really uncomfortable.
Which also is not your responsibility. And you're not making me uncomfortable at all. And if someone listening is uncomfortable, they don't have to keep listening. So really, I don't want you to be concerned with that at all. And, you know, Brene would say, like, own your story, you know? And, like, those are parts of your story. And you don't have to sugarcoat it. You don't have to make it sound like this, you know, nicely tied up story. Yeah. It's a little messy and there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of sadness involved. And, like, that is what it is. And like, it's okay for you to feel that. And it's okay for you to share it how it is.
Yeah. And so definitely like my relationship with my mom, it just kind of sucks. And there's no sugarcoating that or saying like, but it's been like, I've grown from it. It still sucks and it probably will suck for a really long time. And I'm not even going to put a but statement on the end of that because it's just hard. And that's just something that I've had to walk through, and it's been. I'm going to stop there. Okay. I'm not going to sugarcoat that.
We'll stop there with Mom. And with your older brother, I mean, how does that feel when you do see him? Like when you have to go home for Christmas, or I mean, just what kind of feelings come up there? There's never been like a conversation with him, like as adults, about what happened?
No. He said, so the day after I told my mom, he said, I'm sorry if I hurt you. And that was the end of it. That's the only words that have ever been passed between the two of us regarding the topic. And so now, I mean, I don't know, my family is big on like, when you come home, everyone like hugs everyone. And when you leave, everyone hugs everyone. And so that's always really awkward. I try to like mysteriously have to go to the bathroom or like go outside when those kinds of things happen because I don't like being physically close to him. But it's definitely been hard. I think that we I mean, we just don't have a relationship. It's essentially like I go home and he'll just say like, oh, how's school? And I'll be like, oh, it's good. How's work? It's good. And then that's about it. Like, we don't know any details about each other's lives whatsoever.
So do you think he has any idea that this is something that you struggle with and that you've had to do, you know, all this work and that you've had this trauma stemming from his actions?
I would hope that he does. I doubt it though. I just think that my family is very naive and in denial, like to the nth degree. And they just have those blinders on where it's literally like it never happened. But I would hope that on some level he recognizes, I mean, he obviously knows what he did. And so I hope that he would recognize that has been difficult for me, but I'm not sure that I'll ever get that like validation from him.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is almost curious if it's something that he has struggled with as an adult, processing that he did.
Right. Yeah. And I have literally no idea. And that's something I've toyed around with, like writing him a letter and actually sending it, or like really kind of talking to him. And I think that I've always just decided that it's with him. I'm not sure it's worth opening up that box just because I'm really not sure what would happen, and I don't want my like self-worth or me to be damaged. And so it's almost like it's just easier the way that it is right now. Maybe one day it'll be a conversation to be had. But yeah, I mean, who knows really what he has done. We're just not close. And it's weird to all be sitting in a room and be like, I literally know nothing about your life and I'm your sister, but that's where we're at.
And I'm gonna ask you one more time to challenge you on this of how that makes you feel. Because you've said it's hard, it sucks, it's hard.
Yeah.
But like feeling, like how does that feel?
Yeah. It feels, sorry, I'm trying to come up with like the right word for it.
Maybe it's like a sound. Like sometimes I can't think of a feeling when someone asks me and I'm like, it just feels like, blah. And I just say weird noises. Maybe it's a noise. I don't know.
I think it makes me angry, but anger is not an emotion that I'm very comfortable with. And so I sugarcoat a lot of emotions, but anger is one of the big ones that I don't feel comfortable feeling, because sometimes I don't feel entitled to be angry. But I think
you don't feel like you have a right to be angry.
Yeah.
Because
which, like,
you've
I know
been invalidated.
Yeah, you know, for years it's
And anger is also typically like an umbrella emotion, protecting us from the other really vulnerable feelings. Yeah. So I think that I'm angry at like what was taken away from me. Like I could have had a strong relationship with him, and I mean, had none of this ever happened, like I could have had a strong relationship with my brother. And so it feels sad and just kind of like blah that's like not an option. Because it's hard to get past the fact that like things are never going to change with him. Because as much work as I've done and as much processing and changing as I've done, if he's not going to put in the same level of work, there's not going to be anything that changes in our relationship. And so that's definitely, it's sad. Because I want my family to be normal, and we're very not normal. And it's, you know, you want the like picture perfect, like all my siblings are really close and we like do everything together, and that's not a reality that I'll ever have. And so again, it is like that grieving. And I used to think that grieving was just like if someone died, like then you're allowed to grieve. But like losing a friendship or losing like your childhood or the potential for a relationship with your family that's actually substantial, like those are things to grieve as well. And so I think there's been a lot of tears and a lot of hard questions about like why I can't have that. Yeah, that's understandable. I'm, again, still just so blown away at like how you've been able to really internally do all this work kind of on your own. I mean, basically with your therapist and with, you know, some friends in grad school and everything. But, you know, I mean, how old are you?
25.
Yeah. Same age as me at 25.
Yeah.
You know, that you've essentially done all of this work kind of on your own. And like, I hope that you kind of take credit for the work that you've done and how strong you are to have done it all and to be still doing it. Because again, you could still just be like pushing things down and I'm sure that still happens occasionally, but
for sure. Yeah.
But to have the courage to like actually face it all is amazing.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And I think that grad school is definitely not an ideal time to sort of just be constantly an emotional mess.
I don't know. Grad school is kind of an emotional mess for me too.
It's just like, so like grad school itself, you're an emotional mess. And then like to be dealing with this on top of it, I'm like, this was not ideal timing, but I mean, it ended up being great. It just, for a while, I was like, why am I doing this? Yeah. Like, because I'm crying every night because I don't want to do homework, but then I'm also crying because I'm like opening all these boxes that I don't want to open. Yep. And it was definitely difficult for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All the boxes kind of open at once makes it a little bit difficult to start unpacking things.
Yes. Yeah. Like something has to have a lid on it at some point. But
yes, absolutely. Ugh. I just can't. I'm like, thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing with me. And I just like, I hope you know, like, do you know?
Do I know
like just, I hope, first of all, I'm really glad that you came on and talked about it. And second, I hope that you listen back. Maybe not the week it comes out. Maybe, you know, maybe give yourself some time. But I hope that you listen back and I hope that you can hear your strength and I hope you can hear your vulnerability and I hope that you can like feel a sense of like empowerment over your story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like as I've been talking, there's been like that voice in my head that's like, well, you're saying the wrong thing and you're like screwing this up and like they don't want to know that. But I'm just thinking back to like listening to like the podcast when other people have been on it. And I've literally never thought that about anyone that has been a guest. And so it's like, I can't put that kind of pressure on myself because it's not fair. So I'll listen back eventually. And hopefully I will see it through a different lens.
Yeah. And I hope we'll touch base again once you listen back and like we'll process it a little bit, but, cool. Thank you again so much for coming on and sharing. And I guess I want to ask you too, before we say goodbye, if there's anything that you want listeners to know about your story or that you would want to tell listeners, maybe someone who's like going through something similar, just anything else that you want to like kind of leave people with?
Yeah. So there's an organization, it's called RAIN, but it has two N's. It's the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. And they have a ton of wonderful resources for anyone that is experiencing something similar to what I went through or really any sexual assault in any form. But they also have a lot of really good resources if someone you love has been through this, just kind of some tips about like ways to interact with them and ways to be there for them. Because I think that's also a very uncomfortable thing. And so they definitely provide guidelines for how to support someone who is going through something like this. So little plug. But I guess if you're listening and like any part of my story resonates with you, maybe you've been through something similar, or maybe you're currently going through something similar, definitely reach out and talk to someone, whether that's, I mean, you can definitely email me if you want to, or, I mean, talking to a parent or a teacher or really anyone. I just think that there's not enough communication and I just think that telling someone once you're not the only one that's holding this in and someone can share that burden, it definitely becomes lighter and easier to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. We all got to just like talk more about stuff because stuff is hard.
Oh, for sure. And there's so much stigma around, especially like sexual abuse and still, I mean, like rape and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that, it needs to be talked about because it's obviously widely experienced, and ignoring it isn't going to make it go away.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And silence only feeds shame. Another Brene.
That is true. Yep.
Thank you, Brene.
She is a goddess among men.
Yes.
She's wonderful.
And so I will list the organization RAIN and your email that you can be reached at in the episode notes description. So you guys can message her and, ask questions or share your thoughts or give some support. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and talking.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah.
I was worried, but it's actually been very freeing and enjoyable. So thank you for asking the right questions and letting me ramble.
Not rambling at all. And no, thank you. And if you guys also want to, send in emails with questions of topics or whatever, you guys can email me at ask.letstalkaboutit@gmail.com. That's where you emailed me, and now we're here. But also love reading your guys' reviews on iTunes. So please head on over there and let me know what you're enjoying about the podcast. And that does it for today's episode. And thank you guys so much for listening. And I will talk with you next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Wave Podcast Network. Check out all of our shows, including the Brain Candy Podcast, I Don't Get It, Babes and Babies, Coffee Convos, and Let's Talk About It.